Good afternoon. I am Dr. Wisdom here for your collaborative planning and roles professional development. So, as the need for co-teaching partnerships is formed, so is the need for more guidance. So as those co-teaching partnerships are formed, so is the need for more guidance. Most concerns focus around the need to increase the effectiveness of those partnerships, those relationships that teachers have together in order to improve student performance. And in that, we're improving teacher satisfaction in the way that they work with each other, collaborate, make meaningful lessons, through their shared roles and responsibilities, and ultimately how our students perform. The three major aspects of co-teaching are here. So there's a need for a personal commitment to the role of a co-teacher. An important piece of it is recognizing those interpersonal challenges of co-teaching, such as building trust, understanding of each other's personal philosophies and approaches to teaching, and making sure that those roles of a co-teacher are equitable, that there's some parity in the room, and that we have clear roles and responsibilities, and those are coming across clear to each of the teachers in the room, especially those that surround the need to plan together, and then conducting those periodic rather reviews of progress. So right now, I'd like you to pause the video and take a minute to list the challenges you and your partner face in creating an effective collaborative teaching partnership. What are those things? What are those challenges that you think you're facing now in your current teaching situation? What are some challenges that you see happening in some other places as well? Are there other challenges going on that you can speak for, that you've heard of? So pause the video and do that. So now that you've listed those challenges you and your partner face in creating those collaborative teaching partnerships, I want you to check your challenges with these 6 typical reasons for co-teaching teams. So number 1 is don't know how to designate our roles for delivering instruction. Number 2, can't find the time to plan together. 3, when we do create a lesson, we don't know what format to use. 4, when do we find time to plan? We don't use the time effectively. 5, we're not sure what quality collaborative teaching looks like, what characteristics should be observable in our classroom, what practices should we consistently use. Number 6, we don't effectively handle disagreements between the two of us. Often we just avoid talking to each other, which leads to more frustration. So as much as we'd like to think that these things aren't happening, they really are. And it's okay that we recognize them and realize that we are going through the trenches together. There are a lot of these things that we have in common, despite what everybody talks about or what everybody thinks. These are some of the things that are affecting us all. The most important responsibility and the biggest impact that you can make on those teaching relationships and how we're impacting the quality of our instruction and what students get out of our instruction, your most important responsibility is your contribution to planning. It does first lie in the hands of admin as it involves the master scheduling process, but it may also require that teachers are flexible and come up with creative options. So describe how your planning time with your co-teachers is integrated into your schedule. Right? Reflect on how this is regularly scheduled planning time and how that impacts the quality of your collaborative teaching partnership. So I'd like you to take a minute, pause the video, and talk to somebody about this. And then pause the video. All right, so here are some of the effects of a lack of sufficient quality planning time with your partners in order to regularly meet to discuss the upcoming lessons and the roles each of you will play in the teaching process. These are some of those effects. If you are a spec teacher coming to a general education class, the lack of planning time could mean that you're coming up with accommodations on the spot. You're feeling like you have those responsibilities that of a paraprofessional or paraeducator. You're feeling that you're not a necessary part of the classroom environment. So a lot of this is due to your unprepared lack of planning time. If you're unprepared due to the lack of planning time coming into the room, you may be looking to the general education teacher partner for directions, and it can happen often in the middle of instruction. So instead of knowing ahead of time what's happening, that could be the case. You may be finding duties, like I said, similar to a paraeducator. So those are some of the effects of not planning ahead of time. And also both teachers are feeling unclear roles, not sure what you're supposed to be doing, not sure what it's supposed to look like when it's happening. It's just really all a spur of the moment and unplanned, right? Inequitably shared instruction. So maybe the general education teacher is teaching most of the lesson and we're taking a one teach, one assist approach or one teach, one observe approach. And it should not be that way unless you're using one teach, one observe to do some data collection. or you're teaching, or you've actually planned out your one teach, one assist, and there's something happening there, but there should always be parity. So even though you may be doing a one teach, one assist model, you want to switch it up. You want to try some parallel teaching. You want to try some alternative teaching, and you want to really write those into the plan instead of just assuming one teacher is going to be taking on the bulk of the work while the other teacher is coming in and kind of just assists, right? There are lots of ways to do that. And not only does the special education teacher have to take a part in the primary instruction role, but the primary teacher, the general education teacher, also needs to be a part of the IEP planning process. So there should be time for both of these. All right, so if you're a special education teacher responsible for teaching 3 content areas, for example, it can be really difficult to attach a single grade level or subject area team for a common planning period. So it can be very difficult for administrators to schedule that time. So unless the teachers are creative and both willing to be flexible, that time can really be restricted to accidental meeting in the hallway, for example, and this is not keeping up with standards for quality teaching partnerships. Here's one option for protected planning time. So we want to protect our planning time at all costs. So utilizing the same planning period each week. So if there are students receiving assistance from a special education teacher in a particular period, for example, and maybe there's a period that special education teacher is not needed for services every single day and still meet the requirements of the IEP. The teacher would then be free to meet another co-teaching partner during that planning time. So they can meet with the math teacher while that was time that they may have been allotted to be in the ELA class. If they have met the requirements of the IEP and those minutes per week are met, then they're able to go ahead and meet with another teacher for planning. Also, is there someone who can fill in or someone who's able to fill in? So is there a certified teacher on hand who is willing to get in there and be a part of the instruction? Okay, it doesn't always have to be that particular teacher, especially with our teacher shortages and our substitute shortages. Is there somebody who is willing to come in, or is that an area we can even look at? We have to think about that and have conversations about that. If it's not possible, then it's not, but it's worth looking at and thinking about. Every building is really unique in terms of scheduling and the way things get done. Is there something you thought of that you could share that might help to get in that protected planning time? So we can think about that, and I'd like you to take a moment and think about that. Maybe there's something came to your mind that you've never shared before. Is there some way that we could make sure that we're getting in that protected planning time? Zoom meetings, I know that was on my last screen. Zoom meetings and Google, those are great ways to go ahead and make sure we're collaboratively planning. So you want to have those outlets, those platforms to make sure that you're planning. So you're using a Google Doc to have a format for what you're using to plan your lessons. And therefore, both teachers or 3 teachers, the speech pathologist and the PTOT, everyone can kind of collaborate on those plans, right? Because our students need all of our support. Check for understanding, true or false. Number 1, co-teaching partners may not need any planning time if they have taught for several years and are familiar with their subject matter. That is false. You still need your planning time. As we go through year to year, our co-teaching partnerships do change, even if they stay the same. Our curriculum changes, our parents are changing, our students are changing, their needs are changing, our environments are changing, and we still need to meet to make sure that we are staying up with the times, using the appropriate strategies and technology to really meet the needs of our students today. The students that we are faced with today, the students who we are meeting the needs of, are quite different, or can look very different from students 10 years ago or 7 years ago, or whatever it is for the amount of time that you've been together. The next one is protected planning time requires that each partner value the necessity for shared planning enough to be flexible and creative. Yes, this is true. You do need the partnership to value that time, right? So you want to both be valuing that time, and being flexible and creative within that time is definitely needed. And the last one, we're recognizing how difficult it is to find joint planning time for co-teachers. We should be even more committed to using the time effectively and efficiently. We do. Yes, that's true. We need teachers to be dedicated to that time. Put on your timers and for 25 minutes and make sure that you are using that time to actually plan. And that doesn't mean that we're writing IEPs or we're grading assignments. Though that may be what we've heard is part of our planning responsibilities. You should really think of your planning time in terms of what instructional strategies are we going to use for this day or for this lesson. Okay, so we want to make sure we protect that planning time at all costs. All right, so now that you've had a moment to think about some of these things, how can we use planning time to the best advantage, to our best advantage? How can we use the planning time we do have to our best advantage? So how can we use that time? What does that look like? All right, so the most important responsibility again is that planning time. So think about 2 behaviors that reduce the value of shared planning time and write them down. Think about a team member that uses a lot of planning time ineffectively. You don't have to call anybody out, but who is that? Think of it in your mind. What are some descriptors that characterize poor use of planning time? So that part you can certainly talk about, right? So think about those 2 behaviors that are just simply making it ineffective time. So if you're not using that time to write out what you're going to be doing and to talk about and discuss what you're going to be doing to meet the needs of students in your classroom, then it's ineffective time. So what are those things that get in the way? What distractions are about? And can you list them? Can you name them? Right. Okay, so don't schedule planning time at the end of your day. Your ability to focus and be creative is far reduced when you're tired. So at the end of the day is not typically the best time to have planning, but if that's the time you have, that's the time you have. So drink that second cup of coffee and let's keep it going. Don't look for small increments of planning time. So 10 to 15 minutes of planning time is typically a waste of your energy. So find that minimum, that 25 minutes of uninterrupted planning time or more if possible. So you and your partner can quickly go to your planning location and begin work immediately. Okay. Treat it like it's a class period, bell to bell. Like you want to start immediately. And you want to stay focused. And when that timer goes off, maybe that's the time that you end your work. Consider using a timer. I really would. It'll keep you focused. This small step can transform ineffective planning sessions to highly effective planning opportunities. So here's the way to set planning norms for you and your teaching partner or a planning team, right? So identify your prime time meeting. What time is it going to be for? And then review that. So how can we use our planning time more effectively? Here's an example, right? So this is an example of the norms that you would that you need to establish before your meeting time, right? Such as being on time or cell phones off. Those are small things, but we have to commit to doing those things in order to get the best outcome for our instructional periods and the best outcomes for our students and our relationships with each other. Just setting aside that time. You can put your phone aside for 25 minutes, okay? Turn it off. So things like this may be possible. Maybe your norms look a little differently. Make sure you use an agenda and stick to it. That is probably part that I wouldn't take off. So one of your norms should definitely be that you have an agenda. Maybe it's a bulleted agenda, give it your best shot, your best effort, and see where you go from there. So protect your time, use an agenda. It's not a time to feel pressured to complete a faculty survey or to write a note to a parent. You're going to experience the same issues of insufficient planning time if you don't protect your planning time. Use an agenda with topics. What are we going to be teaching? Who will be responsible for what? What students do we have that are struggling, and what are we going to do about it? Here is a solid framework for you to use when you're planning. It's called the IDT, the Instructional Design Tool from Stetson. There are 5 decisions that teachers need to make when they're designing a lesson. So this format, the IDT is typically used in planning instructional units rather than daily lessons, but can be adjusted for either, all right, depending on how much you need to write. Your collaborative teaching roles are in here. So when you're looking at the first part, what are you teaching? This is where your objective is going to go. I encourage you to check your curriculum guide if this objective is predetermined. Next, you're going to select a pre-assessment strategy to determine prior knowledge, interest relative to the topic or the objective. So what strategy are you going to use in order to determine students' current stance with the topic that you're discussing? Are you using, what kind of anticipatory set are you using? What kind of KWLs are you using? How are you getting to know what students know so that you can know where you're going to take them next? Then we have our instructional strategies and activities. The best way to get students to learn is to create those structured collaborative learning opportunities. So have students learn and talk, do those Kagan structures, and think, pair, shares, the get one, give one, the numbered heads, discussion boards, your $2 summaries, your tweets, your quick writes. Those things are going to come in here. Whether you're doing direct instruction or scaffolded instruction, those things are going to be part of your instructional strategies and activities. So you can kind of pair those together, what we're going to be doing and how we're going to be doing it, right? All go under those instructional strategies and activities. High impact instructional activities that are going to engage students and help them gain and retain knowledge is the way to go. How will your students be grouped? So the next part is how they're going to be grouped. Do you want them working in pairs? Are they doing it whole group, small group? Do they have assigned roles when they're working in those collaborative groups, those small groups? Okay, so those are things you can think about as you formulate your groups. Are all students graded according to an online test? So how are you going to assess students, right? Are they all going to be on Schoology? Does that work for every student? Or is a paper version better for this student or that student, right? Could this product assessment, what could this look like? Are we having students create something as a way to assess their knowledge? Is it a summary? Is it a postcard? Is this formative or summative, and do we know the difference? Is this an all-encompassing assessment, or is it just a piece of learning along the way? What do we expect students to know and be able to do by the end of the activity? So each activity is paired with an assessment or product, as you can see here. So you want to do that accordingly. Obviously, there are going to be students who have IEPs. We can't ignore those IEPs. They are really, really important because they contain some helpful information about each of our students that will help them learn. Are we using the IEP at a glance to know what accommodations students require in order to make sure they're successful? What kinds of curricular modifications are necessary to each student? Does the student need in-class support, assistive technology, or teacher read aloud? You may not need all of these different parts that you see in here, the accommodations, the curricular modifications, in-class support. Maybe these aren't all different pieces for you. It may look a little different for you. But it's important to be mindful that you've got the full picture of students. So making sure that you have all of these in line and in line with the IEP is really important in being proactive. The more proactive we are in planning these needs, the less likely things are to surprise us. That's not to say we won't be surprised at all, but we're better prepared to handle those surprises when we've made a plan of action. The blue spots you see here are the parts where you can put T1 or T2. So T1 is teacher 1, T2 is teacher 2. So who is responsible for what? I would actually recommend that this go throughout your lesson plan. So back in your instructional activities, putting in the T1, T2. Who's going to be responsible for what? Teacher 1 or teacher 2? Let's increase parity in the classroom so that we can make our relationships better. All right, so what's a part of the IDT? As you see here, we've got a little quiz for you. All right, so I have fixed it. All right, so to determine if students have a grasp of inferring, use 10 short everyday scenarios printed on index cards and have students write a brief explanation on the back and underline parts of the text that supports their thinking. So you've got your IDT in your hands, and if you don't do it, you can go get it from my website. You can also email me and get that from me, but I'm asking you to use that to help you determine what these parts are an example of. So what is this one? Is it objective? Is this assessment, pre-assessment, grouping, activities, or is this an accommodation? In this lesson on inferring, intermediate students will make inferences related to the story using schema and text evidence. Students will gather together as a class to complete the following activity. And students will read in small groups during the following activity. And the last one is explain that they have drawn a conclusion, predicted, and made inferences based on their clues and their schema. Create an anchor chart. Explain that we use the same strategy to process conclusions, inferences, and predictions. Define terms and add definitions to the chart. All right, so now we're going to figure out which one is which. The first one here is a pre-assessment. If you guessed it, you guessed right. The next one below here is grouping. So it's telling us how our students will be in groups during each activity. Okay. All right, sorry about that. And then we've got in this lesson on inferring is going to be our objective, right? It's telling us what we hope our students will do. And then we've got the last one being activities. So they're kind of right after the period, just on and on activities that will be separated into the instructional activity section. So if you've got these parts of your lesson plan already, then you're on the right track. It's just narrowing it down to make sure that we have all of these aspects every single time. All right, if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. Thank you so much for watching.